full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Education Tonight on Teachers Talk Radio with myself and my co-host, Brent Poland. Hello, Brent. Are you having a good week?
Hello, Adam. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, really good. Debate in our house at the minute, how much water you're drinking at school, how often are you going to the toilet?
It's these big giant water bottles that measure drunk at 10 o'clock, drunk at 11 o'clock, drunk. What is going on? It's like, seriously, who's somebody's read some stuff, it's ridiculous.
This is a genuine question. Are we on the verge of actually a public health crisis of children drinking so much water that actually causing themselves physical harm? Who would have thought it in our day and age? I don't think I ever took a bottle of water to school to me.
How did I survive? I mean, we had to drink the water. We had an outside fountain. Yeah. A little tiny outside fountain, like a little bowl, and you pushed the little button, and you had to sort of and literally get your, you had to get your tongue into the water. You think it was almost like the little doggies, trying to scoop up the water. And when it was cold, God, it sounded old here because it was 3 miles into the countryside in the Mourne Mountains. God, when it was cold, it was frozen. So you had to hit the pipes to get the water out. And that was it. We all sure. Oh, God. You think we all shared that as well?
Yeah. You'd never think nowadays, would you put your mouth over one of those? But we've got
now it comes with flavor. Now it's these aired up things that come with flavor. I mean, what they probably could do is you just get one of those fountains and get one of the vapes and you could create your own little air up, couldn't you?
The flavor came from the person before you lunch, didn't it? On the top of it.
Yeah,
we've got an action-packed show tonight.
Monster Munch was my favorite.
Oh God, beef and onion on top. So we're going to discuss the Labour's plan to introduce VAT or take away the exemption for independent schools to claim back VAT. And we also want to, and we've got Nick Pietrek coming on to discuss that later on tonight. But first of all, we wanted to, we thought we'd have different news, to be honest with you. We thought we'd have news that the Ofsted one-word rating would be gone. And they'd listened, they'd done the big talk, they had listened, but it seems not.
No, and that's the thing. We had announced this show last week, and then we had this sort of conflab when we saw the rumor mill, the kind of leaks that you get from government saying there's going to be a big announcement about Ofsted, and everybody was, big announcement at Ofsted, one word judgment, brilliant. The big listens worked, the campaign with Ruth's worked. They've listened to the inquest. Great, we're getting somewhere. This is fantastic. We're actually finally getting some traction here. They've finally understood, listened to the profession, listened to the list of people, including ex-Ofsted and lead inspectors, including all the experts, including doctors. And you thought, great. And we tonight were prepared to deliver the show on the reaction to Ofsted removing the one-word judgment. So this morning, when I waited for the press release at 12:01, I pretty much nearly spat out my coffee that was keeping me awake. Although I was also being kept awake by the nightmare that was the Everton match, but that's another matter entirely. But the
big news was there was no news, essentially.
Well, the big news is that there is no news, and it's pretty much as you were.
Yeah. It's almost like a satire sometimes, isn't it? We're going to make a big announcement, and the big announcement is that there is no announcement. A bit like on the thick of it, where you have to go and reverse one of the announcements at the start. They had to kind of, why even inform anyone that the story is coming if there's nothing?
I'm a bit more old school. I'm drawn towards the old yes ministers. You know what I mean? We've seen that we have done something about it, but we haven't done something. I mean, we are literally living in some parody world and satire world where we all thought that we would be having a show tonight that would be saying congratulations to all the campaigners, congratulations and well done. And because I'm going to be honest, I want the whole thing abolished.
Yeah.
I want it abolished. So I wouldn't be pitching let's reform Ofsted. Every time they do something like this, it makes me say, See, I told you, just abolish it. Get done. Get rid. No negotiation, no compromise, no appeasement. Get rid of them. Oh, job done. This has just made me even more, I'm sorry. I'm just making me even more like they're just not listening. They just can't be reformed.
It's hard in your thoughts on Ofsted. And obviously we've got Well, should we play a clip from Wiltshire, because I thought that was an interesting perspective earlier on.
Do you think ministers have made the right decision?
No, I think they've made the wrong decision. I think they've not listened carefully enough to what the coroner has had to say. They haven't listened to the head teacher associations, two-thirds of head teachers have said over the last year that they've lost confidence in Ofsted and the single word judgment. So they haven't made the right decision. I mean, Ofsted over the last 30 years since its foundation has changed and adapted over that time, and it has remained a force for good. It needs to change and adapt now.
Okay, so we do have actually someone coming on to discuss this with us.
We have Edmund. Edmund was with us for Ruth's show that was 3.5 hours long, and Edmund's been at the forefront of the campaign. And I'm sure he's, like many of us, probably angry about it as well. So, hi, Edmund.
Yeah, hi, Edmund. Should we just ask you the question straight up then? Have they made the wrong decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Haven't they just? Before I go on, can I just excuse my background? Many people won't know this, but I make toys for a living. So consequently, I'm surrounded by toys. And that's
your code name is Geppetto.
That's the reason for my Buzz Lightyear and Woody would regard me as God. This is an absolutely horrendous decision, and it's very hard to express how upset I am about it. We, as you know, as many people will know, we worked very hard last year to try and affect changes in Ofsted, and we really thought we knew there were always going to be sticking points. Gillian Keegan never lied to us from the first meeting we had, in the sense that she was always open that there were things that were going to be difficult for her to do that she knew that we would want to do. Prime amongst them being get rid of single word judgments. But the door was never closed. Mm-hmm. And what I find so difficult is she fully understands the human cost of this system, the terrible cost of this system. And we always thought, in the early days, it would be very much, we would have conversations on the lines of, well, of course, we can't do certain things until after the inquest, because the inquest is going to, establish things in a certain way. And that was one of those early realizations that, so our, if you like, personal experience of Ruth Perry, our knowledge of her, Julia as a much loved sister, that wasn't going to be enough. That we were going to need to have the backing of the coroner. Then, of course, that we had the awful problem of at one stage it looked like there wasn't going to be any funding for a lawyer, and I can only tell you how horrendously that would have turned out if that had been the case, because Ofsted, with their 7-person legal team turning up, taking over half the court, the way that their lawyer cross-examined, I say cross-examined, it's not an adversarial process and a coroner's court, but it certainly felt that way a lot of the time in terms of the way that they were directing the questions, and the verdict, the conclusions of the inquest backed up everything we said.
Yeah.
The Regulation 28 report, the Prevention of Future Death report that the coroner produced afterwards, backed up everything we said. And then we were told, oh yes, but of course the inquiry is going on, and they're going to come up with some important things, and it's obviously better to make changes all at once to to incorporate everything that they're going to say. And then, so we had a final meeting in January, and I must admit, at that meeting, I got the distinct impression that this was going to be the last meeting. There's just something about the way that people were behaving and the way that they were noting down things we were saying as in a way that made me think they're not going to come back to us on that. It's hard. It's just a feeling that I had.
Yeah, you just got a sense.
But I just got a sense that was the case. And
you're sort of thinking they've done their thing, they've ticked the box, they've listened to you.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like, thanks very much, move along, and see you later.
We were having a conversation about Julie was having a conversation at the time about unions, funnily enough, and we were, saying that we thought there was a possibility that because earlier in the year there were things that that Julia had definitely instigated, that Julia changes to the system that Julia had been front and center of achieving, and one or two of the unions made noises like it was the credit should have gone to them, and we were just having a general conversation about if we achieve things, it would be good to be acknowledged, and there was just this kind of must acknowledge the way that it's that kind of I'm writing this down, I'm underscoring, and that's going to be the end of that, and I don't care. It was always about the end goal. All of that sort of stuff, it didn't matter. It was.
So what was the end goal then? Did you think the end goal was because Julia,
the end goal
change.
The end goal isn't rocket science. It's not religion. It's not complex. It's to have a regulator, to have an inspectorate that is fair, consistent, transparent, accountable, and whose judgments, the consequences of the judgments, are open to challenge and proportionate. That's it. That's the beginning and the end of it. How you achieve those things, that's a thing for the whole community. That's for all of the teaching community to decide upon. Do you go for Singapore-like system, and which is a sort of mixed mentorship and partnering up teachers, head teachers that are having issues with others that have been successful, so that they can mentor them through the issues. I don't know.
Can I ask, Edmund, when you're in those meetings, did you ever get the feeling that they were open to change?
Yes.
Okay.
We wouldn't have done them. I wouldn't.
Because the last time we spoke, you were full of hope.
Yeah,
and you were full of hope.
I absolutely
and you were, because you were like, we're going to meet, they're going to talk to us, we're going to present our case, and the door was open after the coroner's report. and there was and there was a back and forward, and there was an engagement, and there was you are doing your bit, Julia's doing her bit. Yes, the union's a call for abolition, but there was pressure coming on from all these different sources. The coroner's report was there. It was hard to ignore that, but they seem to have rolled back. They seem to have kind of like somehow bottled it.
And then, I mean, I'm just absolutely flabbergasted. It's like as I was up to 4 a.m. going through that document last night. Because I literally couldn't believe it. In that 17-page document, the word "big listen" is mentioned 20 times. 20 times.
Quite ironic, isn't it?
It's more than it's absolutely astounding. They are resting so much. The basic response to almost every point that the select committee's made, if it isn't just a straight out no, or we've already dealt with this because of things that we did last year, then it's the well, we'll wait to see what happens with the big listen. The big listen will inform the response to this, and it's like, but the big listen is a fixed thing. I can go and look. I've looked at it many times, and the big listen does not answer the questions that they are setting in that document.
Yeah,
and it's just absolutely flabbergasting.
What's your response to Gillian then? Because we've got a quote from Gillian, because we've got angry parent. Your tagline here is angry parent.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with Gillian is suggesting that she's using parents as the reason, because parents like these judgments, and I'm for the parents. So it'd be interesting in your take on what you think your overall reaction to is Gillian making that choice of like, I'm sorry, teachers, I'm going with parents on this.
So what I think about that is, okay, first of all, if that is your case, what is the evidential base?
Mm-hmm.
In my very first meeting with Gillian Keegan, so Julia never needed me. She could have done the whole thing easily by herself. Anybody that's seen her has seen what an amazing, unbelievable, capable woman. Every inch, her sister's image. She is an amazing person, and she never needed me. But what we, from an early stage, thought would be good in terms of the presentation to the Secretary of State is that we didn't want there to be an opening for her to go, oh, but teachers think, or oh, but parents think, because I am, I was the uber parent, 14 years of Caversham Primary, 4 children through the school, and Lisa Telling, who was the other part of our trio, is a Reading head teacher who had known Ruth very well for years and years and years, and served on the safeguarding committee that Ruth chaired for local schools. So in that first meeting, Jean Keegan did a very similar thing. She said, we know that parents like single word judgments. And I just said, okay, fair enough. Can you show me the evidence for that? If you've got research to back up the idea that parents like single word judgments, show it to me, because I'm baffled. It's not been my experience ever that it's been the first thing a parent's been interested in. The first thing a parent's interested in terms of picking a school, is seeing around the school and getting a sense of what the school's like.
Yeah, getting a feel of the pastoral side as well.
But you never know that from walking around an area, is it? The first thing you see on the school gates now is the Ofsted rating, so it still has a massive power, doesn't it? In the community.
I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, I've got 2 things about the idea that the vast majority of people are happy with the system. If the vast majority of people are happy with the system because their school is good or outstanding, and they are content, because it obviously there is no incentive for them to move against the system. But that again is one of those things where we have to look at this in terms of the responsibility of a society over its citizens. We're not just, we shouldn't judge the system because some people have a great time with it. Martin Oliver said to me, "Oh, but I've had people, who've had really great experiences with Ofsted, and I don't doubt it. I don't doubt there could be any number of people who would put comments in the chat saying, yeah, I found it all fine, and there's no problem. But should we really judge the system by the experience of the best person, when the worst experience you can have is what's happened to us?"
Yeah.
Is it
you
ever?
said the key word earlier for me was consistency and trust. And you're right.
And
it's not consistent. It's got to be consistent.
And it's just not. And that's not, that's just what's not good enough. Is we cannot be in a society where it is acceptable that a head teacher will die, and that's an acceptable part of a robust inspection framework. That's just not, that isn't acceptable to me. So because what I find very difficult is the argument which you see Spielman making right afterwards.
Hold it together now, Edmund. Hold it together.
She's coming out of the woodwork after up, because she's on damage limitation, and she wants to rescue her reputation.
There's a rewriting of history going on, isn't there? Really,
exactly. And so it's the subtle thing that she does, where she tries to turn it into an argument about accountability. Like, I'm supposedly saying I don't want accountability, and I don't want people to do whatever they feel like doing, which is complete nonsense. None of us have ever argued that there shouldn't be an inspectorate, that there shouldn't be standards, that there shouldn't be, that teachers shouldn't be held accountable for their actions. That isn't the point. It's not. The point is the consequence of this system. And I'm, frankly, if you are too stupid to come up with a system which doesn't cause harm to teacher well-being, then you're not the right person for the job. We cannot say that teacher well-being must always be sacrificed for child safety.
They have a duty of care. I mean, that's the thing, Edmund. They are our employers. They have a duty of care to us. No, you're absolutely right. My last question, because we're going to go to our break, and our next story is what next? Because last time we talked to you, it was like, we were moving somewhere, but this is a break on it. So knowing Julia, I don't think this is going to stop you guys. Let's be honest.
No way.
I think if anything, it's going to make you more determined. Let's be honest. So what next then? Do you think? How do we get that change? What do we do next time?
So we're in a different world, because now we're outside the tent. We're not. Then they're not going to be speaking to us anymore. Certainly not the election. Obviously, we are trying to. We are anticipating there'd be a change of government, and we would be looking to talk to the next incumbent in that position.
Has anyone reached out to you at the minute from the Labour?
We've had 4 meetings. Okay. Not with me, with Julia. So, it's that's already happening. But but there's a different feeling to that. I don't think anything meaningful would happen until until the dust has settled. And that's a tragedy in its own right, because we've got this whole year where the same system is operating in the same way and achieving the same results. So, you know, that's a massive failure. But even so, I'll just sort of say generally, where we go next, we also we want to try and, now this might sound like a crazy thing, but we want to try and we want to try and get the unions together and and have a unified response, because obviously we've got a big gamut of opinion. We've had the NEU for 20 years saying abolish Ofsted, and I don't think that is the way to go, because there needs to be an inspectorate, and I don't think, it's not like we feed the entirety of Ofsted into a sausage machine and they, you know, disappear. That
it's getting harder to pull people like me back from the precipice. Because I am at that point, you know, they're pushing people like me to say, I can't read, we can't redeem them. They can't be redeemed, you know.
I understand, but
but thank you. You've been it's raw, and I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you.
I'm sorry if I've been too much.
No, it's what we do here, and it was raw, and the thing about it is obviously you've got the support of us here, and you know, you're always welcome to come and speak to us, because your campaign is a Teacher Talk Radio, and one of our own, we lost one of our own, and it is about looking after the welfare of us teachers, head teachers. And we all want the same thing. We do want change. What form that change takes, we might disagree on, but we do want everything you said at the very start is absolutely spot on. We need those things: accountability, consistency, and I think that's what the profession deserves. Let's be honest with you, and that would be a fitting tribute to the memory of Ruth as well. Yeah. But thank you as always, passionate from the heart, and is exactly what we need. And thank you for your hard work and what you're doing, because sticking up for us, it's good to see. You know, parents, angry parents sticking up for us as well. We need more like you, my friend. We need more like you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We'd love to be back on soon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to just take a quick break, Brent, just to talk to our sponsors for this show, which is the Teach Well Toolkit, which is a multi-award-winning company equipping school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. They are DFE approved provider of the Senior Mental Health Lead programs and have trained over 100 schools to date. Feedback has highlighted how beneficial schools have found the training and commented on how Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. Teach Well Toolkit was founded by school leaders Steve Walters and Sunita Bagri. Sunita and Steve are qualified MHFA instructors of mindfulness teachers. They have an impressive portfolio of skills to support school staff, including counselling, coaching, supervision, and mediation. By signing up to Teach Well Toolkits, senior mental health lead training, you will have access to fully resourced unique program which will support you every step of the way in your as a senior mental health lead in your school. And I did go on after the show, and I was really looking at that, but you can scan the QR code there if that's something you are interested in. There's a range of courses there, but that one looks particularly good to be a senior mental health lead, particularly as we've just heard from Edmund. Again, mental health is really important, and we finished the show last week talking about kind of opening up and kind of talking, and it's interesting. I was at my children's parents' evening literally just before the show. And, one of the things me and my wife was saying to them is, make sure you look after yourself as staff, because one of their teachers was saying, I was ill on Monday, but I felt like I had to come in because Ofsted were in. So again, the pressure of Ofsted on the group is phenomenal.
So your child's school is currently having Ofsted, so that's going to be interesting.
They literally came in, so it'd be really interested to know. I was wondering if they would actually be one of the last schools to have the one-word rating, which is interesting. But you had an exciting early morning call, Brent.
I did on the back of our on the back of our very successful interview last week with Catherine Birmelsing, which was a good interview, and Catherine was a good sport, and we were quite lucky actually, because she didn't want to give that many interviews last week because of obviously the Muslim prayer ban situation, which I mean I had to show every inch of my self-discipline not to ask a question about it, which we did on her. Because so many things you could ask Catherine and so many things we could. But I was contacted by the LDC to have a discussion about the VAT and the VAT on schools, the Labour policy on VAT on schools. Now, what was interesting about it was they were expecting me as a secondary school teacher in to be more receptive to it. And
well, let's not give too much away.
I'm spoiling the
let's play the clip.
A history teacher at a state-run secondary school and weekly host of Teacher Talk Radio. Good morning to you, Brent.
Good morning, Matthew. Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. First of all, I mean, should private school fees, carry VAT or not, in your opinion?
Ideologically speaking, I'm with you. Ideologically speaking, I think fairness, social justice, the state sector enviously looks at the private sector. And you have always this mantra of there are better teachers, there's a better quality of education. And you'll get proponents of private school education saying, we want the best for our children. And that's second class. It can make you feel like a second class teacher. It can make our children feel second class.
Agreed.
And I think we have to have the deeper conversation about education full stop in this country, because it is an absolute postcode lottery. You can get some fantastic state schools. You can get some terrible private schools. You can get this hodgepodge system that we have is just creaking. And really what I'm disappointed with is I came in 1997. I'm a beneficiary of the Labour educational policy in 97. Education. I look at this policy and I don't see the same vision. I see a kind of Robin Hood type of thing of taking from the rich to give to the poor, which might play out well.
Interesting. So you share some of the views that Julie has, although one might argue, imagine you would be diametrically opposed, that Labour envisages, I'm assuming that almost every parent will keep their child in private school and pay the VAT if indeed the schools decide to pass that charge down through the fees. And actually what you're saying, rather like Julie, is we don't know. It could be that many parents will leave and therefore that money won't be liberated.
Yeah, so I think you got kind of a message back from him during the show, didn't you, to say that you'd actually swung his opinion.
I flipped him, yeah. He'd gone into it barnstorming and saying, because on the outside, it's a headline-grabbing policy. It's kind of those wealthy private schools, they don't pay VAT on charitable status, and it's low-hanging fruit. It's an easy policy to sell, isn't it? Because it's a Robin Hood type policy. But like everything else, politically speaking, I look into the nuts and bolts of a policy. And we've had far too many bad policies when it comes to education that grab headlines but don't practically work in the real world. And for me, there are a lot of questions about, how much money is it going to earn? Are you going to get the benefit of that money? And for me, sort of the mantra later on was, let's improve the state sector instead of just going for the low-hanging fruit and ideologically attacking, the private sector, which is not really fair on some people, because you're stereotyping that private sector as being everybody's the same. It's not. There are many different diverse kids who go to private sectors as well. So he literally sort of actually said I'd convinced him slightly differently that this policy wasn't fully thought through, which then obviously made us generate the conversation we're going to have now of, let's have the conversation about, what impact that will have on the private sector. And is it a policy that will have more unintended consequences? Is there any part of it that is true, and what do we think?
Yeah, so I don't think I've spent as much of any week looking at kind of Schedule 9, Group 6 of any kind of tax code in my life. So good evening, Nick. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So your headline that you wrote was that this is a bit like the Boris Johnson bus. It's a headline-grabbing thing that just doesn't do. There is the bus. Sorry for anyone that brings back any kind of trauma from a couple of years ago. This year headline: Labour's plans about VAT are like the Boris Brexit bus. State your case.
Yes, that was what I said, and I hold to that. I think it's so very frustrating. I mean, if I'm looking objectively at the politics that are around at the moment and the policies and proposed ideas for education, you know, I would be more inclined right now to vote for Labour because of what they're promising to do for education in terms of more vocational training and the like. And I'm more excited about their policies than I am by the Conservative Party when it comes to education. But I do think that their proposal that they anticipate funding most of their manifesto by putting VAT on independent school fees is completely erroneous, and it's very frustrating because as Adam was saying, Brent was saying just a moment ago, there needs to be a reality check here. I like very much what Brent was saying a moment ago about the fact that there is that perception by teachers, perhaps in the state sector, that they are seen as not being as good as the independent sector. And I know that is not true. I've taught in the state sector. I know that the teachers in the state sector and the independent sector are every bit as good as one another. And it's really important to understand that. The advantages of the independent sector, of course, we have much smaller class sizes, and that makes the world of difference. Of course, if you could replicate that in the state sector, wouldn't we all love that? And I would be the first to accept that probably there wouldn't be a place for the independent sector if that were to happen. But what they're looking to do in terms of creating funding, supposedly by putting VAT on school fees, is not going to be the way to achieve that. I think if you look at, I mean, there are so many different angles to look at this from. I think in the first instance, there's you have to consider, and I know this is what they say in New Zealand, where they do have some tax on independent schools there, but they then also have subsidies to offset those taxes, because at the moment we can't access anything. You know, we're looking, for example, to build a new AstroTurf, which we would open up to the wider community for wider use. But because we're an independent school, we won't be getting any grant funding. The state school down the road can get all the funding they want. So
isn't that ironic, Nick? That's ironic, because that does happen. I've seen private schools in local area close because they're on the margins. They're actually on the margins. Whereas the perception is that, you know, every private school is Eton or Harrow or, you know, like that. But actually and in fact, I think this week, I think a private school in Buckinghamshire is closed after 160 years. I forget its name. And literally because they are on the margins and their facilities are Victorian, and some of those private schools are struggling to capture, as some of the state schools, newly built state schools, have improved. They have overtaken some private schools, which is my point. That you don't always get a private school that's better than a state school and vice versa. It is changing. The postcode lottery is changing, and it isn't that stereotype of they're rich, we're poor. There's more to it, isn't there? It's more nuanced, isn't it?
Well, I mean, interesting. I was prior to being headmaster here, I was also headmaster down in Buckinghamshire, which is, you know, one of the counties for grammar schools. And there you would find that actually you would be spending an awful lot to live in the catchment of that grammar school to get an education comparable to the independent school, and you're paying for it by paying more on your house. But they're not going to charge VAT, extra VAT, or any extra taxes to live in that house. It is what it is. So essentially, they're going to get the equivalent of an independent school education in a state grammar school, and they are excellent schools. But for some people, that's not an option. So they're not going to be able to get into those schools. And actually, one of the things that I do worry about is that, you know, there is no doubt, and I have to recognize that we will lose pupils on the back of this policy. It will happen. And whilst they keep saying that we don't have to pass the VAT onto our parents, well, how can we not? Is the reality. You don't ask Tesco's not to pass VAT onto the consumer items there, but you're expecting the independent schools are different. Now, we do run as a charity, and with that comes a responsibility. We are not making a profit. We do not have any endowments. We don't have much in the way of a surplus. Any surplus we have gets automatically assigned to going back into the benefit of our pupils for the school. There are no shareholders, no one is financially benefiting from anything that is made on a school fees. So it all goes directly back into the school to ensure that we can give the best education we can.
Yeah.
Do you want to know something ironic about that, Nick? And this is where, where I'm formulating my thing on it. A lot of multi-academy trusts are actually more of a business model than some independent schools. And when I look at their CEOs and I look at their branding and the policies and the deals that they do with uniforms and the PFI schemes, there's a lot more semi-privatization of the supposed state sector than there is actually. The independent sector has retained its probably identity as an independent sector. It hasn't really changed that much. And the grammar schools were frozen, weren't they? About 20 years ago, they were frozen in place, weren't they? They weren't allowed any more grammar schools. And I think not many have closed. So you're kind of stuck where you were with grammar schools. But the state sector has evolved into a kind of semi-privatized multi-academy trust organization, which operates on a kind of semi-business model. So the funny thing is that Labour's not proposing any changes to that. Now, of course, one thing that they might say is it's not fair, because I often say this, is I'm not a public sector employee. I'm employed by a MAT, but I'm not getting the benefit of being in a private business because I don't get like flexi time. I don't get all those things that people in the private sector get. So we're kind of halfway house. What do you think then? Do you think that the independent sector does need to evolve possibly then? How would it evolve to survive if that VAT was put on, if that makes sense?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I've actually just been hosting the Stafford Chambers of Commerce here in the school before coming onto your show. So, you know, the whole point of that is the recognising the importance, which I think schools need to do anyway, of working much more closely with businesses. So I think that probably independent schools do need to really evaluate how they run themselves to be more efficient as a business. That is true. And we will look to generate other revenue streams through sponsorship deals and so on with businesses. So we absolutely have got to do that, because that is the way that the schools will survive moving forward. And if a school doesn't recognise its needs to be able to see itself as more than just a school, they will struggle.
Do you think, as one of my things nobody's mentioned is, and I want your take on it, do you think some of the parents, and you know these parents, obviously, they're parents that send, do you think they will opt for homeschooling? Because that's obviously what's happening in some of the public sector as well. We're seeing a growth in homeschooling, pandemic sort of unintended consequence. And of course, if people aren't happy with the education, so you take a parent who maybe can't afford to do the independent school anymore, or the private school any longer, will say to themselves, well, you know what, we're going to take the hit and you stay at home and you educate the children. And that would mean that they don't transfer into the one school to another. So that sort of saving won't actually accrue. Those children will actually come out of the system altogether. Do you think that's a possibility, that many will also do that?
Yes, undoubtedly. I mean, I've seen that in a couple of cases already. And I do think others would do that. And interestingly, no VAT is going to be applied to those online offerings either. So private tutoring and tutoring services are not going to be taxed in the way that independent schools will be. Although, what's the difference in terms of what they're offering? Nothing really.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I've obviously, as I said, kind of, I spent the week reading these kind of this kind of Schedule 9, and you know, currently you are exempt from VAT. So what do you think they have to do in terms of the law to actually make that happen? Because it's going to be very difficult to not include another group that could accidentally almost be caught up in this as well.
Well, I've raised that with a number of people. I think that's an excellent question. I don't think anyone entirely knows the answer. Okay. I think that, you know, that there will be legal advice being taken by different societies representing the schools in order to work out exactly what the legal position will be. So I'm in no two minds that there would be a legal challenge. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that will be successful, I don't know. I mean, by coming out of Europe, we aren't covered by EU legislation in the way that other European countries are, where you're not allowed to put VAT on education. So a consequence of coming out of Europe has been that actually they're not beholden to observe and keep that any longer. So, you know, they are.
Do you know there's an irony? Sorry, Nick. There's going to be an irony about that, because many of the political elite who probably wanted to remove us from the European Union are more likely to have sent their children to the grammar and private sector, aren't they?
They are indeed. Yeah, that's quite right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but my worry is it's like a youth group or another provider that's doing some really good work in a poorer community could end up being kind of caught up in this kind of inadvertently, and it kind of loses whatever Labour are trying to do here. To me, it seems like a bit of a kind of a cheap kind of headline for Labour, because, you know, I've got friends don't work in education, just go straight away. Damn right, that's exactly what they should do. But actually, once you tell them about the kind of the law and the standing of exemption in terms of VAT, and then you tell them that another like small group could get caught up in this, all of a sudden they're kind of not so sure. So I'm a bit kind of I'm a bit kind of concerned about it once I've read through those exemptions and who could actually inadvertently get caught up in it.
Well, I know that if you look at the families that I have at the school, it's again very regional, isn't it? If you're in the southeast, where in fairness, I grew up in Guildford. I did go to an independent school, but I also taught in 2 of the state schools in Guildford as well. I would say that where I am here in Stafford is a very, very different demographic to the south of England. You know, there is a lot more money in and around the home counties in London. Could the parents more easily afford VAT being applied to school fees? Quite possibly, although when I was down in Buckinghamshire, I know for a fact that not all of them could have done. Some could have done without batting an eyelid. I don't think I have any families here in Staffordshire who will not feel the impact of VAT on school fees. I think that some will endeavour to do whatever they can, as they are already, to ensure that they try and give their children the best opportunities. But they are making a lot of sacrifices. I genuinely, and this is not just to make it sound dramatic, but I genuinely have some parents who are working 2 jobs each, and they're living in a pretty simple housing, because their priority above everything else is to give their children the very best start in life. And I think that's what we want for all our children. But they've absolutely done that because for them, this is the school that they feel they're going to get the best opportunities for their children in. And they are sacrificing everything to do it.
Because that could be another irony, couldn't it? Because the very wealthy potentially could pay 3 years in advance before this exemption comes in, so they could almost get themselves out of this, get their children into the school they want to. And again, it's the ones just making ends meet or struggling families that lose out. That's why I kind of think it's not very well thought out. And we've just got a clip from Bridget Phillipson. Should we just bring that on? So just have your reaction to that, please, Nick.
The Tories are shooting your foxes one by one. One thing that they probably won't do is abolish charitable status for private schools, which was something that last year you said you would do, and then you said you wouldn't. Now, Rachel Reeves is going to have to find money from somewhere. Do you think it's time for you to reconsider that, since you won't be able to get money from non-doms and windfall and all that?
So what I've said on that point is that we would end the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, so VAT and business rates, and we put that money directly into our state schools. They are under enormous pressure at the moment. We would use that money to deliver 6,500 more teachers, improve mental health support for our children, which is a really big concern for parents right across our country. And it's something the Chancellor could get up on Wednesday and say immediately that he would do. I'm not convinced he will, because politics is about political choices, and so far they've shown no willingness to give our state schools the investment that they urgently need.
So it's a bit like what you're saying, that money's going to go straight, or as you would say, on the side of the bus, straight into secondary schools and support them. What are your thoughts on that clip?
Yeah, well, I just don't see that working out. I mean, the economics simply don't work, and there've been lots of studies done on this. And I can go through those, but the reality is that this is not about economics. It's not really about funding the state sector schools. It is an ideology, And I'm in no doubt about that. This is very much about, I don't think the Labour Party like the independent sector, and whatever.
Honestly, a lot of their children go to the independent sector. There's always that when you see there's always that ironic thing of, I think, wasn't it Diana, but bless her, that the state school and anyway, I always have two foots in the camp in this. I've been to the state sector, educating the state sector, but I actually went to a grammar school at 16. It's very different in Northern Ireland. I went to grammar school at 16 on GCSEs. And of course, we had the 11 plus, and we still have the 11 plus in the grammar school. We have the grammar and the secondary. And I can't fault the fact that the education I got at the grammar school when I was 16 was one of the reasons I'm successful. Very different to the secondary school I went to. The combination of both was good. But as an educator, I mean, I understand why they're doing it. It's red meat. It's a red meat for the red wall scenario, isn't it? It's basically trying to play optics of this looks good, but it's also answering that question of when they say, where are you going to get the money from? My issue, and this is what is taken up with Matthew Wright, was it's 1.5, 1.6 billion pounds. This is their estimate. Now, I both know they say 1.5 or 1.6 million pounds divided. You know they're always going to overestimate. Now, how much of that actually will go into the state sector and how much money is needed in the state sector is roughly 15 billion for buildings alone. Then you've got mental health. You're talking a massive amount of funding needed. But this is them saying we're going to redistribute that wealth. It's literally like an old socialist policy. It's weird. It's like Keir Starmer finally doing socialism, but not doing socialism. We're going to pick up on these schools, and then we're going to redistribute that wealth to these schools. And that's sort of on a simple thing. And our poll showed that. And that's the problem with this. It does play out well. And in fact, our poll showed that. I think we put our poll back up. It was 74% of our poll said that they like the policy. Because on the surface, isn't it? On the surface, it seems like it's not fair. There's these wealthy private schools that have all the advantages. And then there's the state sector, poor little state sector. Let's just shuffle some of the money from one to the other. That's really what they're trying to sort of suggest, isn't it, really?
Yeah, we had a comment there, Brent, to say that is this money just going to go straight into the CEO's, the Matt CEO's paycheck? So that's kind of the feeling out there as well. Can I just pick up one point there from what she said? Is it a tax break?
Not at all. I don't know how anyone can see it as being a tax break, because you have to bear in mind that actually everybody who's sending their child to an independent school is paying their taxes, and those taxes are supposed to be able to pay for their children to be educated in a state school. So everybody has an entitlement to send their children there, and they're effectively not using that allowance that they have paid for already, and they're paying for their education twice.
Yeah.
So it's certainly far from a tax break. I mean, what would be a fascinating notion, but I can't ever see it happening, would be to say, look, this is the amount of money it costs for us to educate your child in the state sector. You can have that money, and you can choose to either have a place in the state sector, or you can put it towards education in an independent school. Those independent schools might very well be looking to then subsidize that with a bursary themselves. So you take that into account. Actually, that child will be getting an independent school education, creating another place or reducing the size of classes in the state sector by doing that. But no government, I think, would ever be bold enough to say, here you go, this is the amount that we know that you would be spending, that we spend for your child in a state school. You can choose to use that money as you wish. What do you want to do with it? Because that might make a difference between some people being able to afford an independent school as well. But we'll see. If I might, can I just go back to the economics of what they're suggesting? Because the Labour Party are very much basing their assertion of 1.5 billion on the Institute of Fiscal Studies report, which was really based on studies done on American schools rather than on British schools. So that they themselves recognise that there are shortfallings in what they have described, and they're basing that on, let's say, a 5% reduction in independent school children moving across, migrating, so to speak, into the state sector. And on that basis, they would then generate that amount of money. Now, the Adam Smith report, which has been done subsequently, more recently, just in the last few months, says that would be an optimistic migration, saying just 5% would move. And they are expecting that actually you're looking that it'll be more to a 10 to 15% migration of pupils from independent schools, and at that point, it generates no revenue for the government at all, nothing. And the other expectation is if you then go to the Baines-Cutler report, where they've projected that it could lead to as much as 25%, which I doubt, to be fair, but they've suggested 25%. That would actually result in a 1.6 billion cost to the taxpayer. So it flips around completely. It only requires 25% of children to move. That's 150,000 children moving from the independent sector into the state sector. And instead of it raising 1.6 billion, it costs the taxpayer 1.6 billion pounds. So this is where, as I say, the economics of this make no sense at all. If they want to raise 1.6 billion, they can do that by just putting 3% tax on additional tax onto alcohol. That would raise the same amount of money, and that's you'd say that's equitable.
Well,
the other thing
doesn't win many votes in the red wall. Let's be honest with that one.
Well, no, perhaps not. But then the other thing is, you say, well, if this really is a tax on rich people, why are they not just putting the additional tax on rich people? Put your salary cap and say, well, that's the point at which you're paying a certain amount of tax, and you'll raise 1.6 billion or more very, very easily that way. You see, I think one of the other things that people are missing out on here, and I say this is why in New Zealand they've been very eager to maintain the independent sector, is that you need a benchmark. The government needs to be held accountable for the standard of education in the state sector. So how do you do that if you haven't got something else that you can measure it against? Now, I'm not saying that justifies the independent sector, but it does to some degree if you look at it from the point of view of saying, you know what, the state sector needs to be better. We know it needs to be better. How do we know that? Because when we look at the education that's being provided in the independent schools, it's not at the same level. Why is it not at the same level? Maybe we've got too many killed children in the classes. They're not being given as much music or drama, so where is it going wrong? But you need to see what's going right in the independent sector to know what's going wrong in the state sector.
Yeah. And you see, that's the thing that my point to Matthew, right, was I would like every school in the country to have a level of consistency to be as good as the independent schools. I'm a working class kid that got to a grammar school and that got a good education, not on ability to pay, but in my ability. And that's the difference that really hurts me as an educator. It should be ability, not ability to pay. And we don't have that. Social mobility is getting wider. I suppose one of the positive aspects that might accrue from that, if you're getting children leaving the private sector, going to the state sector, and their parents, they may invest more socially in the state sector. They may, the type of parents sometimes, because behind the children is the parents who would drive and motivation. They've got that cultural capital. Then it might be a positive social aspect of it may even out a little bit of the social capital because those parents are more invested in education. Putting those parents more in the state sector may help, increase that cultural capital, more PTA. You know what I'm saying? That might be something social that may be a positive outcome. But I agree with you on that. I don't justify it economically speaking. I don't think it makes sense.
I agree with what you're saying there, Brent, as well. But I think, there's such a gamble here. And I think one of the things that is being overlooked are the children themselves. Because let's say a child does need to move a school because the parents can't afford it anymore.
Good point.
Now, this is where actually I think the Labour Party, again, are not looking at this at an empathetic level, because if they're trying to understand what that child will go through when they're being told, I'm sorry, you can no longer be with your friends in your school because we can't afford it and we're going to put you into another school. Now, it might be it's a very good school that they're moving into, but the reality is they are probably going to find that their self-esteem is not, their happiness is not, their confidence is not. The place where they've been happy, where they've been developing and growing as a young person, is all of a sudden taken away from them. And that shouldn't be on them. Again, if we're talking about taxing rich people, just tax rich people. Don't make the children the victims of a policy that is actually ill thought through, because it's not going to help the children. It really isn't.
It's a really powerful point, Nick. Actually, I never thought of that. Actually,
yeah, I think that's a great
pawns, aren't they? They really are pawns. Yeah,
I think that's a great point to end on. Putting the student at the centre. That's maybe where the Labour Party should focus on, maybe rather than like a cheap headline, or as you said, Nick, the side of a bus.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Very detailed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good, thank you. So Paul Hazard's coming on looking at the compassionate leadership in schools over on Podbean. And as we've always said, we always have something going on Teacher Talk Radio. So if you want to kind of join the roster of hosts, please do. We were very pleased as well that Teach Well Toolkits has sponsored tonight's show. And it is a multi-award-winning company equipping school communities to build a culture of staff and pupil mental health. They are DFE approved provider of the Senior Mental Health Lead Program and have trained over 100 schools to date. Feedback has highlighted how beneficial schools have found the training and commented on how Teach Well Toolkit understands the mental health challenges faced by staff. Teach Well Toolkit was founded by school leaders Steve Waters and Sunita Bagri. Sunita and Steve are qualified MHFA instructors and mindfulness teachers. They have an impressive portfolio of skills to support school staff, including counselling, coaching, supervision, and mediation. By signing up to Teach Well Toolkit's Senior Mental Health Lead Training, you will have access to a fully resourced, unique program which will support you every step of your way in your role as Senior Mental Health Lead in your school. And you can see the link there and the QR code to click on. Again, Teacher Talk Radio is always looking for hosts, so please feel free to another QR code scanner to go for. Because QR gone mad, hasn't it, on today's show? But you can apply there by scanning the code and getting more information. As I said, Paul Hazard's coming up as on Podbean, so you to kind of nip over to a different platform. But next week we are going to be looking at again a fallout from COVID, particularly looking at maybe some results that are coming down the pipeline as we're finding out more of the impacts of COVID, particularly on, again, our younger students as they're coming out of, Key Stage 3 into Key Stage 4. What was the impact of that lost primary school year as they were leaving?
We're all saying, weren't we, that we all had the conversation behind the scenes going, what is with year 9?
Yeah.
What's going on with year 9? And it's interesting anecdotally, you sort of talk to your friends with teachers going like, year 9 is always a difficult year. It's always a hormonal year, but there is something really going on with a whole cohort. And that is, I'm glad that some people are putting reports together. However, I'm not a big fan of just saying it's COVID. I think that's just an easy cop out. I think there's more going on than COVID. I think there is definitely societal culture. We want to explore that in great detail because it's a multifaceted thing. There is definitely things changing education and society in general. And that evidence we're seeing that in behavior. I think it's behavior, it's outcomes, it's all connected, isn't it? You can't have one without the other. So we're going to explore that and go through that research.
So if you are an expert or an expert that would like to come on, and you've seen Edmund and Nick tonight, please feel free. We want to keep this a kind of lively conversation, with experts as we've seen tonight, to bring experts in, and so therefore teachers can watch it. If you have liked tonight's show, please feel free to share it, like it, pass it on to friends and colleagues. They do our show, as all shows, kind of sometimes are retweeted, put onto X and onto some of the podcast platforms as well. So keep an eye on that. I know the team today shared like a whole link of past shows. So again, they're kind of timeless in a way. You can kind of nip in and out and cherry pick as you feel you want to. So we've been told to wrap it up. So let's wrap it up, Brent. Good night. Thank you very much for a great show. And we shall see you next week on Teacher Talk Radio, Education Tonight. Good night.
Good night.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused